Well, my experience of working in a public school system in the United States was such that because I had worked in the Victim Offender Reconciliation Program, I had a strategy for bringing people together and working on problems and issues. The first day that the first teaching job that I had, the first day of school, I realized almost immediately that our discipline system for the school looked almost exactly like our discipline system in terms of criminal justice system. So I thought, wow, this is really actually good news, because I could use what I know from the Victim Offender Reconciliation Program and peacemaking and conflict studies with children as I engaged with them. So while I really enjoy the academics, discipline became my very favorite part of teaching. And I think that's because when the processes of peacemaking and conflict are used, you form much closer relationships with your students. And in my experience, it was very important for us to have a close relationship so that students feel free to experiment, to question as they try to understand the world around them. So I can't really imagine at this point teaching without the structure and the strategies of what Ron and I, who have worked closely together, later called and wrote a book about called Discipline That Restores. So the idea being much the same as in the criminal justice system, the violation of a rule really indicates that there are some people who have had a problem with each other. Sometimes those people are students having an issue with each other. Sometimes those people are teachers and students having an issue with each other. Sometimes teachers have issues with each other, or we have issues with the administration. And so as I thought about that in terms of school, I just began, first of all, modeling with my students. And modeling is a very powerful teaching strategy, because as I was doing that and people were experiencing something different, they began wondering what was it that I was doing, what was different. So it just gave me countless opportunities to share. I taught in first grade, so 5, 6-year-olds. Then I taught 4th grade, which would be about 9, 10-year-olds. And then most of my teaching experience was with 8th grade, 13, 14-year-olds, so the middle school experience. And so as our school really adopted this as a whole school structure, because the structure was really important. It's difficult for children to have a restorative structure in one place and then they go to another place and now they're back in a punitive structure. And children are very astute, I think, at these social transactions and relationships. So they would adjust their behavior depending on what structure they were in. So it was really helpful that we became a sort of a whole school practicing restorative justice. So an example would be 2 students in my classroom took a basketball, which is a pretty heavy ball, into the restroom because they didn't want to leave it outside for someone else to, take and start using. So they're in there and I don't think they had meant to sort of vandalize the bathroom, but they're bouncing the ball around off the walls and that sort of thing, and eventually they knocked a paper towel holder. Okay.
It's all okay.
Okay, go ahead. In the process of being in the bathroom with this basketball, they knocked a paper towel holder off of the wall. And then they were like, oops, and ran out. And so in a punitive structure, I think the idea of coming forward and telling the truth about what you did is very, very difficult. And in fact, in some ways, students would see it as a strong response to not say what you did and never get caught, to sort of lie about it. In the restorative justice structure, the really responsible and brave thing to do was to come forward and to take responsibility for what you did. So at first they didn't want to tell anybody. And then as I reminded them, because if no one comes forward, then the thought is, well, somebody here in the 8th grade did this. And so we're going to get to the bottom of it. We have to investigate, have to see if anybody saw anything, and it takes a while. But in the restorative system, I was able to say to the students, you know, we have this structure in which, you know, we'd like to invite you to come forward, because in coming forward, what we will be doing is figuring out what happened, and then talking about how can that be repaired, how can equity be restored, and finally, you know, what about the future? So 2 of my students came forward and said, Mrs. Claassen, we were out at break and we took the ball into the restroom and we knocked the paper towel holder off. So using the yellow card, which we had a small version to use at school, was like, okay, so it's kind of like a warning that tells us we have a problem. Not that you children are a problem, but a situation that is a problem. So invited them to look at the yellow card, let them know that you know, what we would really like to do in a restorative structure would be to sit down with you and use a specific process in order to talk together and figure out where to go from here. Both of the students were willing to do that. And because it involved repairing something in the bathroom, and that would cost some money, we asked if that would be okay to have their parents participate as well, which they did. So we met separately with the parents and the student, and we had our principal was also present, and I was there both as their teacher support and also as the mediator. So I was the sort of outside, leading them through this process of speaking together. Well, one of my students, I think, who learned the most from this situation, as he took responsibility and he and his mother were talking, she said, well, she just didn't have the money to just give to the school right away. Oh, we also had the custodian or the person who is responsible for the facilities in the meeting, because he brought his catalog of paper towel holders along to show them that there wasn't in the garage or, you know, storeroom somewhere extra holders. He had to look through the catalog, find one that would work for the space. Then he had to order it, and the school had to pay for it, and we had an amount of money. And then not only that, so that's taking his time, which is costing the school something, as well as then someone has to install it and put it up. And that was, you know, a certain amount of money. So we decided on what an appropriate amount would be to repair the paper towel holder. And then his mom had said, well, she couldn't just pay for that right away, so she wanted her son to work. So with our facilities person, this young man figured out, he wrote out a schedule of the hours that he would work or the minutes he would work, how much that would be worth in terms of money. And he helped in the cafeteria every day for some weeks until he had covered the cost of repairing this paper, well, his half of the cost. When it was over, and he was finished and we had a little bit of a celebration together with his mom, he didn't want to stop helping in the cafeteria or after lunch. He was enjoying it and enjoying this time with our facilities person. And so later on, the other student took responsibility, but his mother just paid his half. And I don't think he experienced nearly the kind of restoration that the student who actually worked to pay the money off experienced. Later on, Ron came and gathered some students together with the administrator at our school to talk about this idea of having restorative justice in our school. And so students said, well, they really, really liked it, but nobody got, punished for what they did, and they weren't sure that that was okay. And so our administrator looked at him and said, but Reynaldo, you did this, and you did this, and you did this, and you did this for this length of time, but you're saying there was no punishment? And he was like, well, no, I decided I wanted to do that. And in fact, as I did it, I enjoyed doing that. And so working at our language and trying to figure out, he never, ever did anything to vandalize anything in the school again after that experience. And so, whereas often the punishment's not so bad, it's kind of worth getting the class to laugh and do things if I disrupt, and maybe I just spend an hour after school for having done that. That's the extent of the punishment. So it's kind of worth it. It doesn't really bother me that much. But when you really bring people together and talk and figure out what would be a responsible way to work at these issues, it's not seen as punishment, but we ended up with a much more sort of good relationship type of culture in our school, where people were helping people to, don't do that, because so the children were regulating themselves a lot more. When I have a new class of students, I discovered a very helpful strategy to follow is to create together with my students a respect agreement. And so instead of calling it, these are the classroom rules, here they are, and you must abide by these, it is a time for us, and in the process of doing this, we get to know each other pretty well. And so this is how we do it. First of all, each student has a piece of paper, and I take one just like theirs as well. We fold it into 4 quadrants, and in one quadrant we put, what would it look like, sound like, be like if the teacher was respecting the students? And then in the next quadrant, what would it look like, sound like, be like if students were respecting the teacher? And often we'll add an S to that, meaning really any adult at the school. How would we like to be treated by the adults? How would adults like to be treated by our students? Then what about in the 3rd quadrant, students respecting themselves and each other? What would that look like, be like, sound like? And then in the last quadrant, what would it be like if we were all respecting the facilities, the equipment, all of the things that the school provides for us to use, so the books and everything. And then we write individually, sort of have a silent, sustained writing time. And I write also. After that, we get into small groups, and I join one of those small groups, and we make a composite list for our group of what all of our ideas were. and not repeating ideas, but then sometimes in that process figuring out, how do we want to word this? You know, I say maybe raise your hand if you wish to speak, and somebody else says agree on a process of how we want to be noticed to add to our discussion. And we figure out how we want to say that. Then we put all of those up, and the students, one student from each group presents their group's work related to respect. And then I take all of those and make a composite whole class list of the 4 quadrants and how if we did all of these things, would become a close learning community in which all of us can reach the goals that we have for ourselves as we go through the year of academics, where we start now and where we want to be at the end of that time. And then I say, wow, this would be incredible if we could do these things. And I'm willing to sign the agreement. So I put my name on the agreement, tell the students, some of these things that might be difficult for me to do, like don't raise your voice or don't yell at us. And if you're getting loud, someone may need to remind me, but do it nicely and gently. Mrs. Claassen, speak in a normal voice to us. Or vice versa, because some of the things they would like me to do are things that I would like for them to do as well. And so we kind of have a good time with that, but I want it to be very open. It's not just for you, it's also for me. And to look at that, and then I invite students to sign their names as well. So Ron has this saying, when agreements are made and kept, trust grows. And so that's kind of at the bottom of this process that we use to bring people together. And so when we make this respect agreement, our level of trust of one another grows. And then I can just refer to it, at first I read it every day for maybe the first week. And then eventually if someone is disrupting or something is happening in the classroom, if I just start to walk towards where I put it up in the room, and we keep it up all year, it has an amazing calming, I think, effect on students. And if someone is not using the respect agreement in the way that they are acting or responding, it is a really nice thing to refer to, because it's not something that I said, you have to abide by these rules and you're breaking this rule. It's, we have this respect agreement. Are you willing to keep our agreement? And so we can start there. And because they have had a very big part in formulating this agreement, it is very, very powerful. When we started doing this whole school, a procedure that Ron took us through was to think about whatever you use as a discipline strategy, and discipline in the sense of being a good disciple or model, and in changing behavior. No matter what that would be, whether it's sending a student out of the room or putting them in a timeout someplace, or if it's getting together and talking about it, think about what is it that you would like for that to produce or to change in a student. And so we made this long list of what the outcome of that was, what it was that we were looking for. And the amazing thing was, no matter what strategy you were using, all of those outcomes were things that needed to be taught. So I would like children to learn that doing their homework helps them as a student. I would like students to learn how it hurts this other student when they do this or that or some other thing. And so it was just this long list of things we wanted students to learn, ending with, I would like students to learn how to be in control of themselves. I want students to learn how to make a good decision. And when we looked at all of that and thought about, so does punishment really help them to learn those things? We were overwhelmingly in agreement that no, it doesn't really help them to learn those things, that it's our interactions and building a relationship with the students that helps to teach them those kinds of things. And so that really, I think, opened most of us, all of us, to trying a different structure and to learning how to do that structure. And then that was the challenge. How do we teach everyone to do this? And so that was also partly why we wrote the book. My principal said, it would be nice to have it in a form that you could refer to. I forgot how to use that yellow card. Let me look that up. And students, we also wanted students to be able to learn it and know how it worked. As much as I knew what was going to happen next, we wanted students to know what is going to happen next. And to maybe even say, hey, you skipped that part, and I'd like to go back and talk about that, or that kind of thing. And parents found it as such a relief. So prior to this structure, you would call a parent and say, your child has had a fight with someone, you come down here and pick him up and take him home for 3 days. We're suspending your child. So they would come into the office really upset because they're upset with their child, but they're also upset with the whole, now I have to figure out who's going to stay with my child at home, or do I have to take off work to be with them at home? And, really, is the other child getting as big a punishment as my child? And when we had this structure in place, parents could, if you were called to be part of mediation with a child, they were coming now for a different reason. They were coming because we needed them, this person who loves them and knows them better than any of us. We needed them to come and help us figure out together with their child, what can we do to be the most helpful for both you, for your child, as we're learning how to be social together, and so that your child gets the most out of their school experience. We don't want your child to be at home where they're missing the lessons, because it's much harder to do that at home on your own than if you're in school and hearing the input and doing some of the practice at school. So our goal was no students out of the classroom, not for very long. We wanted to keep students in the classroom learning and progressing. My Christian motivation, I think, is very, very central to practicing restoration in any kinds of relationships. And I think I found that even as I worked in a public school, it was all of this that inspired me, I think, to put my faith into action, to extend this unconditional love to my students, and especially to my students who were struggling. And I think as you have academic struggles, that leads to behavioral struggles at school. And so I think Jane Dick, the pastor of our church, at one point said, we need love the most when we deserve it the least. And so that was, I think, also that idea that this child who is misbehaving, this is the time this child needs my love the most. And so, a time of holding that child closer, not the idea that, well, just do whatever you want. I understand you're having a rough go, but no, holding them closer, and I want to help you through whatever this academic wall is that you've hit, and you feel like you're not progressing as your peers are progressing, and that's causing you to be angry and upset, first with yourself, and then you act out with the rest of us. So what kind of extra help can we give? And I think that's what my faith is sort of all about, is how can I be showing the Spirit of Christ in my relationships with fellow teachers, with the administration, and with students. So we, I think after the more we practiced, when someone would come and visit our school, they would walk in and say, wow, there's a really nice spirit here. And so that was always good to hear, because I think it was because the Spirit of Christ was present in all of the relationships. And one person can, I think, get a lot of things rolling in that direction, and help other people who have maybe a different church background than I do say, oh, that's right, I can put that into practice in my everyday life, because it's not always maybe the way they've seen it as they have listened to their, whatever their church background is. And so I even had one friend who was from a different faith background than me, who finally said to me, Roxanne, you don't hang around with normal people. So that's because I hang around with Ron, who keeps encouraging us to be better people in our relationships with each other.